Okay, so we're going to be finishing lesson 14. As you'll remember last time, we only got through number 27 in lesson 13. I put in all the answers for you to check over those. So we're going to try to do these last few questions, and then the next thing we have to do is talk about lesson 15 in Lambden, which is actually a bit more involved than a lot of the other lessons. So it kind of worked out nicely that we're only having like half as much exercises to talk about today, and then we can spend a little more time talking about the chapter, because there really is a lot to talk about in there and a lot of new stuff. So let's see, my list of names. Okay, I see Aurelio, Claudio, Dante, and Pat. So things are going to get divided 4 ways. Looks like everybody gets about 4, so that should work out. Aurelio, do you want to do these first 4?
Sounds good. All right. Enteritom in pro, aichmos, avo aiop in prat, in tautafnai. So after I closed the door, I sat down and I counted the money that they had given to me.
Yeah, very good. So last time we were talking a little bit about the different verb forms. So can you identify this?
Would be a relative.
Yep. And this one.
Temporal.
Yes, very good.
Okay.
All right.
Neuchor, warm and sa nefwerete. Okay, so the dogs gnawed upon his leg or his feet, his legs or his feet.
Yeah, that's what it says. Why does it say that? We may never know. That's what the sentence says.
Does Coptic actually distinguish between feet and leg? Because I know some languages don't, some do.
Coptic, it has quite a few words that mean both feet and legs. Rat is the most common word that means foot, essentially. But there are others. I think pot also means foot. I think it might be a dialectal thing from what I can tell. I've never quite figured this out. So there are Coptic words for foot, knee, which is Kelly, or sorry, I guess it would be Kella in Saidic, I'm not sure, and leg, which is normally rat, and they seem to be used in actual text more or less interchangeably. So, yeah, which one specifically means which? The one that means knee is kind of the most reliably used to mean knee, but it is sometimes used to mean ankle, so it's probably something like leg joint or something. And yeah, it's never been clear to me, and it's kind of one of those questions that every, like Lambden just gives you this word and says whatever he says in the answers, like or in the vocabulary, like leg or foot, and he just goes with it. And so they kind of just like ignore the problem of what exactly do these words mean. And the question behind it is like, how could people have like grown up and like, you know, reached adulthood without really knowing whether they meant leg or foot? It just doesn't seem possible. There are situations when you really need to know, like, hey, you just closed the door on my foot, leg. You know, seems like there would be times, you know, that you would need to know, like, oh, I cut my leg or foot would be kind of important in the moment if somebody's trying to bandage you or something. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. If anybody has any answers, I'd love to hear them.
Chinese does something very similar. That's why it doesn't feel that unfamiliar. But I was curious if it's one of those distinguishing languages or one of those that doesn't. Looks like it's one of those that doesn't.
It's one of those that doesn't, for sure. It's pretty haphazard.
Okie doke. Let's go to number 30. Thanks. Paipepone intaunojev evol. This is the stone that they cast out, or that they threw.
Yeah. And then of course this verb form.
Relative.
Yep. Good.
And last one. Intapsha shopetinau. When did this festival, and when did the festival happen?
Good. And then this guy.
Second perfect.
Second perfect, yeah. Or second preterite, what I like to call second preterite, the
Second
past
preterite.
tense.
How do we know?
Why?
Question work to now.
Yeah.
When?
That's it. You knew what I was going to ask. Okay, and you beat me to it. Good job, Aurelio. Claudio, would you like to do these four?
Yes. Okay, number 32. Nim pentakbole bol en neisnauch. Who is the one who unfastened this fetter?
Mm-hmm. Good.
Could it be?
I'm sorry?
Could it be? Is it right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. Who is the one who he unfastened these fetters? What about our verb form? What sort of verb form are we dealing with here?
Maybe it's a relative form. No.
Yes.
Oh.
That's correct. It's relative. So this always throws people off a little bit, but this part is the article. So who is the one who did something? And then this is just the normal relative, like who he did whatever. So Pentoff is like the one who did, literally the one who he did. And they're just smashed together into one word. That's, yeah, that's just like a matter of, yeah.
Number 33, Apepiscopos moren en schema. The bishop accepted us into monkhood.
Yeah. Does Lambda give that as an idiom? Like to it's literally to bind someone in the monk's habit. I'm gonna see what he says for that. It's got to be around here somewhere. Yeah. Exactly.
I feel it too hard to translate in that way. To bind, like I translate it like an euphemism.
Okay. Yeah, very good. That's just, yeah, that's correct. That matches what he gives in the vocabulary, so that's just fine. It's literally, it's bind as in like to tie things together, but obviously he's not tying them up with the clothing. He's just, you know, accepting them into the monastery. So, yeah.
Okay, number 34. I couldn't translate this one.
Let's take it into little parts. What if I just give you this sentence? Anka pentime in son et pepe ko, which is also a valid Coptic sentence. You could leave this out and still have a good sentence. What do you recognize here?
But I don't remember the meaning of that verb.
This is the absolute form of this verb is ko, K omega. Coptic keyboard. So we could imagine having something like this, anko in pentime, where we have the full form. And ko is kind of hard to translate into English just because it doesn't have an exact match, but it's kind of a mixture of put down and abandon. It's like let something be in a place, or let something remain in a place. But in this case, ko in sa is to like leave behind. So we actually have two parts to this verb. So there's the ko verb here, and then there's the prepositional phrase made of the preposition in sa or in son before a pronoun, which means behind. So we left our village behind us. And then what about this part? Do you remember the word ko?
No.
It means it's related to the idea of hunger, but it's in this case probably famine. So like a great hunger. So etve peko.
Because of this case.
Yeah, because of the famine. So now putting it all together, what do you get for that?
We abandoned or we left behind our city because of famine.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Or it was because of the famine that we left our city behind.
Right. That's what happens when I add this onto the front of the verb. That's where you get the emphatic verb, and then you get the prepositional phrase or the adverbial adjunct that is being emphasized. This is actually a really great example of what I was telling you last time about the second tense and how to translate it and how to understand it. Again, you know, there's disagreement. Nobody really knows for sure. In his latest book, Leighton has called it the focalizing conversion, and he says that it just brings some part of the sentence into focus. I like that view. The view that I have taken and think works really well, at least in practice, is to always translate the second tense as an English emphatic. So we did leave behind our village because of the famine. So you can imagine a scenario where someone says, well, we had to leave our village behind. And then someone in response says, but you didn't leave your village behind. Or why did you leave your village behind, or whatever they say. And then you say, we did leave our village behind because of the famine. So if you use the emphatic tense, you're kind of emphasizing this thing. And then if you add anything to that, like a phrase, because of the famine, that automatically becomes the important information because it's kind of explaining why this thing really needs to be true. So that's what I mean when I say the emphasis of the adverbial kind of just shakes out naturally. If you're in any sort of context where you said, like, no, we really did leave our village because of the famine, the because of the famine part is inevitably emphasized because it's the crucial explanatory information that was causing the person to not believe you before, which was causing you to use an emphatic tense in the first place. Maybe that works for you. If it doesn't, you can always also use the cleft sentence. It was because of the famine that we left our village behind. Also perfectly valid way to translate this. The only caution there is that it doesn't always work. So there are second tense sentences where creating that cleft sentence actually just makes everything worse. And so you have to use a little bit of discernment for figuring out which one you're looking at. But okay, good job, Claudio. Thanks for working through that. I think it's always helpful for the viewers of these videos later to see some examples where we don't just like, you know, say the translation right away, because of course they could just look that up on their own. The real value is kind of breaking things apart. So I think it's always helpful to have a few of those in there. Do you want to continue with the next two?
Okay, me?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. 35 is difficult to read. Nim pentaf huahek pentafuahek hempeima.
Good.
That means, who is the one who settled you in this place, or who put you in this place?
Yeah, that's correct. Exactly correct in the translation. I know you said it's difficult to pronounce. Why is this difficult to pronounce?
Too much vowels together.
Okay. Yeah, you have this ooh ah. I thought maybe it was something with this superlinear stroke with the K, which, excuse me, which you do see it in real life. Kind of doesn't make any sense. So it came up on the Discord. We were talking about Jinkim in Bohairic, and it's not exactly the same, but pretty comparable to the superlinear stroke in Saidic. And the consensus idea of what this represents is that it represents a syllabic consonant. So a comparable example would be the English word button, where I just hyper-corrected the hell out of it and it didn't sound realistic at all. But we generally pronounce this button. Button. So yeah, I'm a native speaker of an American English dialect. Wait, I can't remember this. I can't remember the code for this letter. Shoot. Okay, there we go. And then syllabic. I have it written down as ampersand pipe. Okay, so we generally pronounce this word. Native American English speakers pronounce it button, and it's definitely a syllabic N. It doesn't have any kind of vowel to speak of. You could say that it has a schwa vowel, and that's not wrong. But the schwa vowel, so you could say something like this, button, button, but the schwa vowel and the N are really together in time. So there's not really a separate vowel happening before the consonant, although that is generally true of all vowels with nasal consonants, that they kind of merge together in time. In this case, it is especially syllabic. It's just, I'm just making the sound in the same way that if I wanted to make the sound I could write it like this, and that would be humming. Just making the sound M without any vowels. So that's what's claimed to be the case for the superlinear stroke in Saidic Coptic. In Worrell's Coptic Sounds, he argues that the reason we see so often cases where some dialects actually write an epsilon and some use the superlinear stroke is that some dialects were spoken more quickly than others. So one dialect like Bohairic, for instance, might have wahek, whereas another one might have the superlinear stroke. Well, that means that the dialect with the superlinear stroke is just spoken more rapidly than the dialect with the vowel actually in place. That's nonsense. That you wouldn't be able to make that argument today because too many people know too much about linguistics to let you get away with it. Even in Egyptology, where we tend not to know all that much about real linguistics, I don't think you could still get away with it. But for some reason that caught on as a result of that book, and it's kind of become the standard argument. I think it doesn't really hold water. I think what you probably have more likely is a case like the English word button, where I can very easily pronounce it button and understand it perfectly, or I can pronounce it button in rapid speech and also understand that perfectly. And they are not really separate things. They are the same word being pronounced two slightly different ways that are both comprehensible. And yeah, that's probably what's going on in Coptic. I think that's probably the reason for the superlinear stroke or the Jenkem, is that this was a place where a vowel sound might be fully expressed, or it's a place where a vowel sound might be sort of quote unquote, swallowed in rapid speech, and you just end up with a syllabic consonant, if that makes sense. A syllabic K doesn't make any sense at all because it's a stop. So this probably never would have been syllabified. It probably always would have been pintaf wahek. There probably always would have been a little short vowel in there. And we can find plenty of other cases where Coptic orthography clearly omits short vowels that have to be in there. In fact, we can find a case here where because the word ko begins with two consonants, if we want to put the article, we also have to put a little short vowel in there to make it work. This is a case where it's very clearly written. There are a million other cases where it's not so clearly written, but it must be going on. So yeah, so that's my take on that. Like I said, in Discord, that's a case where I'm kind of going against the consensus a little bit. I think I'm expanding on the consensus a little bit and making it more, what's the word? Making it more complicated, more variable, less rigid, which is, generally wise when you're talking about language, because language tends not to be terribly rigid. Okay, something in the chat. More ecumenical. I don't know what that word means, actually. Nathan, do you want to explain? I think he's just not talking, but chatting. Oh, he's going to come up in the chat. More all-encompassing. Okay, good. No worries, Nathan. Yeah, thanks very much for the word. That's going to be one of my vocabulary words. I've never actually used that word in a sentence or known what it meant. So that's great. Okay, so after that rather long screed on the superlinear stroke, which I promised in Discord, let's go to number 36. Claudio, it's still your turn. What do you think?
Yeah. Asuech tes shire ejem pechloch. She placed her daughter in the bed.
Yeah, upon the bed, technically.
But upon, sorry. So.
No, that's okay. She placed her daughter upon the bed. Very good. And yeah, I would give that a plus 99%. I'm just correcting that one preposition to make it more exactly like the Coptic.
Yeah, thank you.
Great job, Claudio. Thank you very much for struggling through that one sentence. I know that's never fun to do when it's your turn to do it, but it is really helpful for making the material in these videos helpful for as many people as possible. Dante, do you want to do these four?
Sure. Nefshache mahu en rashe. So his words filled them with joy or happiness.
Yeah. Notice Coptic says you fill someone of something, whereas English says you fill someone with. So yeah, good job.
So why did these sicknesses, troubles, pandemics, whatever, fall upon us?
Yeah, very valid question. Hisei, I like troubles for Hisei because it can mean pain and suffering, and it can also just mean labor, which I just enjoy that every single time. I love an entire language whose attitude is work is pain. It makes me feel a little bit better about myself. How did you translate this verb form, or how would you identify it, and then how do you translate it as a result?
Second perfect, right? So that's why you sort of, because it's a question. So you don't really make a cleft sentence. It just since it's a question with the question word at the end, it needs the second perfect.
What would this be if you made it a cleft sentence? Do you want to try to translate it that way?
I don't know how to make a simple question into a cleft sentence like that.
I think I would make it, it is because of what that these troubles have fallen upon us. And it, now that we're talking about it in this very artificial environment where we're analyzing language, makes perfect sense. Try using a sentence like that with your, with your partner at home, and see what kind of look you get, because it really does not sound natural. It is because of what that these troubles have fallen upon us. Like, are you having a stroke right now? What is that?
Right.
So yeah, cleft sentence doesn't always give you very nice results. It very often does help to comprehend what's going on, though, and I don't think it's a useless exercise in general. Yeah, how about 39?
Entauon and Tepule and Tepolis tem now. Okay, so why did they open the Pule of this polis, the gate of the city? And it's
but
and
not
in its
why.
same. Oh, when? Sorry. Right?
Yeah, when is correct.
Yeah,
And I'm
when.
sorry, I interrupted the other thing you were saying. So please continue.
No, so I was saying it's a question. So it's like, how would you turn this into a cleft sentence, especially with when? Like, because of when? I don't think that works. When was it that? When was it that they opened the gate of the city? I don't know.
Yeah, the thing is, Coptic actually has a very straightforward way to say when was it that they did. It's like these, Pentoph, Pentophiity type constructions. So it's actually not that. It would have to be something like, it is when that they opened the gate of the city, and it's just kind of ridiculous. I'm saying these over and over because eventually we're going to have a class on hieroglyphic Egyptian, which is going to start with late Egyptian. I know I've mentioned this a few times before, but I like mentioning it as much as possible because I'm going to teach a free online late Egyptian class, and I know like a zillion people are going to sign up for it, but I'm putting a Coptic comprehension diagnostic test before, like, that's required to actually be where you guys are sitting right now on the Zoom call with your face visible and translating the sentences. You'll have to pass a Coptic exam, and that's just the only way I can see to deal with the fact that like 1,000 people are going to sign up, but you're going to need to know Coptic in order to participate. So at some point we're going to be studying hieroglyphic Egyptian, and we'll be looking at published translations of these things, and you will actually find examples like that in more recent translations. It is when that they opened the gate of the city.
Okay.
Yeah, they exist for real.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 40. U pentaf shope emok hiren tepule. So what is that which happened to you at the gate?
Good.
Or at the, yeah.
And then this, what kind of thing is this?
That's the relative.
Yeah. Okay. Great job, Dante. And last but certainly not least, we have Pat with 4 questions.
Yep. So 41. I nuja em penuh episet epka. I threw the rope to the ground.
Yeah. Literally downward to the ground. There's this little FSH in here, but yeah. FSH also means to the ground. Interestingly, SH means like the dirt. Wait, no, FSH means the ground. Sorry, SH means the ground, and Ka actually means earth. So, but yeah, correct translation. And then this verb form here.
That's just the first perfect.
Yeah, or preterite. Lambda calls it the perfect.
Oh yeah.
It's actually 2 possible forms.
What was the difference again? I have thrown to the ground.
Yeah, the only difference is in how we translate them into English, or this is invisible, but how you comprehend it in Coptic, because there are actually 2 distinct verb forms that have merged here. So it can be I have thrown the rope to the ground, or I threw the rope to the ground in the past.
And
But in the negation, there are actually two separate forms that you can tell apart.
so I have thrown to the ground would be first perfect or preterite. I get that mixed up.
I have thrown would be perfect, and the regular past tense I threw would be preterite.
Oh, okay. Got it. So 42. Puesh sotem et nashaje. They didn't want to hear my words.
Good. Yeah. What about what type of verb is this?
That's the negative first perfect or preterite. And
Yeah, that's actually the negative preterite.
Oh, okay.
Although I think Lambden does call it the negative perfect. There, Coptic does have this negative perfect that we haven't seen yet. That is, it has a bunch of names, and its origin is sort of complicated, but it is absolutely a perfect in function. It's often called the not yet tense, which is a very weird way to invent a new word for negated perfect. But there is a different verb form that could go here that would be perfect.
Okay. And so I wasn't sure about 43, but empinaue tejera chapeau. I did not look at the widow until today.
Exactly right. Yeah, empinao, I did not see or look at tejera, to the widow with the e as the marking the direct object of now. And then chapeau, this is peho, kind of smushed, like in English today, and then chapeau until today. I didn't see
Yeah,
the widow until today.
I wasn't sure just because the meaning sounded weird, but I guess
Yeah, that's the thing with reading Coptic is you kind of have to trust your reading a lot of times. I don't know, it's just a mess. Like if you read Gnostic texts, they'll say some really bizarre things that you'll think like, I must have read that wrong, but you haven't. You've read it exactly correctly. Yeah, but yeah, you got it right.
So number 44, I wash and Coptic. I wanted to sleep.
Yes, I wanted to sleep. A sentiment perhaps that we can all relate to. Okay, so that's all of the exercises. Let me get back to my place in here. So we've covered lesson 14, which was about, what was it about? Was it about second tenses? Oh yeah, it was about second tenses. So the second perfect slash second preterite. I'm not sure why that's there in this book. Lambden really wanted to introduce it early. I think just because it's similar in form to the relative and you just got the relative, so it makes sense that you would learn right away that like, oh, well, this form can actually be two different things and you have to, you just have to get practice at distinguishing them. But then in lesson 15, we have adjectives. And adjectives, it sounds just so nice and easy, but it is actually horribly fraught because many people will argue that Coptic doesn't have any adjectives. Coptic has, or it has one adjective, neem, the word every, which are, they're always really quantifiers. Coptic adjectives are also nouns pretty much always. So let's just take these first examples. Unoch in polis, upolis in noch. Here we have a big of city, and here we have a city of big. And both of those mean a big city. So you can see right away that the way of joining the adjective to a noun is to create this construction where you have either article, adjective, M or N noun, or article, noun, M or N adjective. So, and you can actually do them both ways. And I think Lambden gives some insight into which way is more likely in a given case or something. But I didn't find it all that compelling. Really, it's kind of just something you have to get used to. So let's look at another example. Pamerit and Shere, my beloved of son, or Pashere emerit, my son of beloved. This second one actually feels more natural to me, Pashere emerit, than the first one. but both are technically possible. And then Pasave and Rome, the wise of man, and Prome and Save, the man of wise. This is really, all of these are really like the wise one, of or as man, or the man of or as wise man. They're all technically still nouns, and that's why some of the adjectives have distinct feminine and plural forms, just like some Coptic nouns have distinct feminine and plural forms. So this would be the black one masculine, the black one feminine, the last one masculine, the last one feminine, and the last ones plural, etc. They're really just still nouns. Greek adjectives are kind of neat because if it's a human, you get the masculine singular, so the os ending for the most part. And if it's inanimate, here you get the on ending. So you would say like prome in agatos, sime in agatos, but then I actually want tepsuke in agaton, if you wanted to say the good spirit. Here the example uses is tepsuke in telion, the perfect spirit, but whatever. You get the neuter Greek ending if it's an inanimate object, and then if it's an animate object, like a person, regardless of whether it's masculine or feminine, you get the masculine Greek ending. So Greek adjectives, when they were borrowed into Coptic, were reinterpreted as being distinguished by animate and inanimate, and the masculine singular is used for animate all the time. Lambden points out that in very rare cases, you will see the Greek feminine actually being used. So tesime in agate. I don't know if I've ever seen this. I can't think of an example. It's very rare. You almost always get tesime in agatos. So you have to re-understand, if you know anything about Greek, reinterpret the adjectives as being animate or inanimate. And then of course you can use a substantivized adjective that kind of goes hand in hand with saying that all the adjectives are really nouns. So pagaton, the good one. And then you can have more than one adjective, as always. Prome and heike and dikaios, the poor just man, panoch and ero and dikaios, the great and just king. Let's see. All Coptic adjectives may be substantivized. So pevien, the poor man, nevien, the poor, pei heike, this poor man, te heike, this poor lady, usave, a wise one, and hensabeu, sorry, the wise men. That also goes hand in hand with these things really being nouns, technically. I think this is the last thing we talk about. Yeah, it is the last thing, are numbers. So the way Coptic forms numbers is actually super easy. You just put the number and then n and the noun. So shomt and joy is 3 ships. Peshomt and Ra is the 3 kings, like from the Bible. Te shomte and rompe, these 3 years. Notice that shomant is the masculine, shomte is the feminine, and they agree. This also applies to one, so wa rome, or wa in rome, with the major exception being that you don't always need the n with the word one. And this is, of course, how we get the indefinite article. So u rome is from this phrase, wa rome. It's kind of fossilized without the n. The n is kind of a later Coptic development. The only real exception to any of this is the word two, which for some reason follows its noun rather than preceding it. So son snau is 2 brothers. Son snau, the 2 brothers. Sonasenta is 2 sisters, and sonasenta, the 2 sisters. It does inflect for gender, but it goes after the noun, whereas all the other numbers go before the noun. And this gets pretty easy once you've seen it a few times, but it is a bit of an exception that 2 goes after the noun. And then just to wrap all of this up, I've said over and over, Coptic adjectives are really nouns. That's a useful thing to know because it helps you understand why you can get these like flip-flopped constructions. So unoch in polis or upolis in noch. A big of city or a city of big. It's really just, you're just attaching two nouns together, like in the English phrase library book. Library does library become an adjective in that construction when you say library book? Is it a librarial book or a bibliotechnical book? I don't think so. I think it's still just a noun, and English lets us stick two nouns together. That's kind of what's going on with Coptic. You don't really have adjectives as their own part of speech, but you do have this construction which allows you to use a noun as an adjective. On the other side of that, I think it's worth pointing out that parts of speech are the part of speech model that we use to talk about grammar is just that. It is a model. Like the famous quote says, all models are wrong, some are useful. Parts of speech are not true. They don't really exist in languages. The language itself doesn't really necessarily have these rigid categories that we like to impose upon it, but they're very useful for us. So if you want to just call these adjectives, I think that's a great idea because like I said, parts of speech don't really exist. They're a thing that we made up so we could talk about grammar. And there's kind of this thing with parts of speech where they're just defined according to like the duck criterion, where if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. If it looks like an adjective and works like an adjective, well, hell, it's an adjective. So you can just call it that without worrying about it too much, which is exactly what Lambda does in this chapter. So I'm not trying to make it unduly complicated. I'm actually saying all this just because I think it's kind of gives us an opportunity to just speak more broadly about what we mean when we describe things in terms of part of speech and what you're allowed and not allowed to do. As far as I'm concerned, you're allowed to do really whatever you want as long as you can you know, explain it to others in a way that makes sense. At least in the context of this class. Obviously outside of the context of this class, you don't have to explain anything to anyone. You just get to do whatever you want. It's like one of the greatest things about life is, but I can't remember how old I was when I learned that, but totally changed my life. It's like nobody is thinking about you and this is wonderful news. It's like so freeing. Like you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. In the context of this class, if you want to call these, you know, Smurfs or whatever, go for it. But you might need to explain to the others why you've done that. But yeah, so that's the thing for today is adjectives, which are really not adjectives, but they still are. And we'll have exercises from 15 for homework. Well, you'll get a bunch of these adjective, non-adjectives, and then we'll talk about it more next week when we go over the exercises. So does anyone have any questions about this stuff?
I have one that's basically like going a little bit ahead to going forward in the book to the late Egyptian class.
Mm-hmm.
The older stages of the language, they have something way more like adjectives in Indo-European languages. What happened to those? I know a handful are still around, but I mean, the vast majority, simple words like green and the like, what happened?
Some of them got fossilized into phrases. So there are a few examples of Coptic phrases like shed a shame is a good one. That's clearly a noun adjective pair. And then even words that we think of as being a single word like remau, which means rich man, but it's actually like it's rome and then ao, which isn't really a word in Coptic anymore, but it's the aa word in Middle Egyptian that means great. So this is just great man. And that's become frozen into a single word. As to why they started doing this thing where they take the substantivized adjective So they take the noun of the adjective and then connect it with the preposition "n." I have no idea why they started doing that, but that's basically what happened to them. Is this new construction developed where you always attach the adjective as though it were a noun with a preposition.
So you keep the morpheme, you just basically you keep the root, you just make it into a substantive and then construct it as a substantive, just like you change the verbal paradigm. You keep the verb, but you put the prefix in front instead of sticking the. So.
And then as to why, that I really don't know. The verbal paradigms, I do understand why.
Right.
The phonetics of the language had changed over time. You probably had something much like you have, like English and German would be a good comparison, where German has all of these ablaut rules that it's using all the time, and English has kind of largely discarded them. And then English also uses this like paraphrastic construction, like instead of "I went," you can say "I did go," and then that kind of gradually starts to take over, just because it's just so much easier to use on the spot than these irregular, complicated forms, especially when there's no longer much consistency to them. So I feel like it's actually pretty easy to guess in German what the past tense form of a verb is going to be. You won't always be right, but there's some general consistency. It's almost impossible in English. And when people guess, they create kind of absurd results. Like I think I mentioned before the case of botten. I have botten a dozen donuts, because people are just guessing. And that was actually really common in my hometown in Texas, because people have just kind of forgotten what. Oh, it's by analogy with forgotten. There aren't consistent rules anymore, so people just kind of give up. They're like, well, let's just call it off. Let's just use a paraphrastic construction. Did that same thing happen with adjectives, where adjectives being modified to agree with their nouns in a bunch of different ways that was hard to remember? Maybe. I don't think so, but maybe.
That could be true, because they would have been inflected. So
they would have been inflected.
You need masculine, feminine, and you need the plurals as well. So that's at least 4 forms to remember.
And if you look at cases where we do have that, they're quite irregular. You actually have to roll the clock back pretty far before the inflections become predictable. In Coptic, when you look at the Coptic forms, they just seem kind of arbitrary. So I think probably the language had changed to such a degree that it was difficult to internalize the rules. And the only alternative was memorizing all of these thousands upon thousands of different forms. So people just kind of over time tended not to do it. Yeah, that's my guess.
Cool.
Great question. And I'm glad that you brought up the Late Egyptian class again, because I want to plug it all the time, because I really would like for it to be mostly filled with students who have taken Coptic. And then I want the YouTube videos to kind of be the place where you go if you can't get up to speed on Coptic with the amount of warning you will have when I start announcing and planning for the course. So yeah, that's good stuff. Coming soon. Coming attractions. All right, good luck on exercise 15. As always, ask me questions, send me emails, ask me questions in Discord and all that kind of stuff. And y'all have a wonderful rest of your weekend and a great week.
You too, thanks.
You too.
See you in
Bye,
a bit.
everyone.